So welcome, Chantel. Welcome, Joe. Lovely to see you guys again here on Social Workers Matter. It is, if you're listening to this in the future, or watching this in the future, it's actually, we're bang smack in the middle of the summer holidays. So we're all relatively relaxed, having completed a very hectic semester as educators. So now, of course, we have a little time to talk, reflect, and think about the work that we're doing. And Chantel and Joe have graciously agreed to come back to Social Workers Matters to talk about some really important work that we're all involved in, but was really the inception of these two women. And it's around anti-racist practice. And really, we're here to hear more about that work, where it started, what was the impetus for it, and just really thinking about what we hope it will achieve in the sector and perhaps even globally in the future. So let me start with you, Joe. Welcome back to Social Workers Matter. How have you been? And tell us a bit about how you're involved in this work, and then we'll move to Chantel.
Sure. Thanks, Sylv. I mean, first, just to say, we're so excited to be here with you today.
We can't stop smiling, sorry.
And you say you invited us, but really, the truth of the matter is that we harangued you and said we want to come back on the podcast because we love your podcast. And I just like your format and the way you engage people in telling their story. So it's a real pleasure to be back and talking about this because it really means a lot to us both, and it's very close to my heart personally as well as professionally. So I suppose where did it start for me was that I think I've always had an interest in racism and what it means to not be racist. And certainly the children in my family are brown children. And so for me, from a personal point of view, that gives me an extra reason to want to really tackle racism and dismantle it, as we might say. And I think upon the tragic murder of George Floyd in 2020 and the kind of talking about what it means to be anti-racist started, I think I just realised that I need to be better than just being not racist. And I think Ibram X. Kendi's book really invited me to think about anti-racism is something that you have to do actively. And so that sort of started another chapter in my journey, I suppose. And I think, in being better, I think it's about finding ways to do something. And so Shantel and I are part of a group of people within the Hertfordshire Teaching Partnership. So at the time, and she obviously can tell her own story, but she worked for Hertfordshire University and I worked for the Tavistock, and along with Hertfordshire County Council, there was some funding available, and we were invited to sort of think about, would we like to develop a course on anti-racism? And so I was like, yes, and knowing that would make me sort of take more responsibility and make me find a way forward. And of course, Shantel also at the same time said that she'd be up for that. And there started a beautiful partnership, really, where we sat during lockdown, pretty much in a darkened room, under pressure, coming up with this course that people really wanted. And it felt like a huge responsibility, and it's been incredibly challenging and rewarding in good measure. But I think the thing I reflect upon most fondly is just the evolution of our relationship through that process.
Okay, well,
I think is part of the materials, really.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, we'll continue to explore that a bit further as well. The whole nature of your relationship, and I mean, clearly, you're a white woman, she's a black woman, and I think people will get tremendous value in learning something about how these partnerships, allyships, and how these relationships can co-produce work and so on, and flourish. Shantel, over to you.
Hey.
Yeah, hi.
Hiya.
You
Good
know,
afternoon. And yeah, again, thank you for having us back again. And I think, yeah, as Joe said, you didn't actually invite us, we did have to, make our wants and needs known.
I was more than happy to do that. Come on, Joe.
But it's always a pleasure to sit and speak. But yeah, I think, just following on what Joe said, I wouldn't say it was, tackling racism was something that I've always wanted to do. As a Black woman, it's something that obviously it's always been a feature in my life, and it's something that I've always been aware of. But I think I was more angry with the system, angry with how I didn't really have words and terms for things, but you just always you always felt, that society was treating you differently. And, my mum and my dad would have stories, grandparents had stories about, issues and things that happened to them. And I always remember thinking, I need to know more about where I'm from. I need to understand more about, what this is and what this means. So this is like kind of young childhood, adulthood coming in. But yeah, when we got the opportunity at Hertfordshire, obviously coming into social work, I experienced a lot, in terms of looking, seeing peers, jump above you quite quickly. And I spoke about it before about not really understanding racism until I entered social work. So I won't go into all of that again, but it really kind of opened my eyes. And then, as Joe mentioned, George Floyd, it just began, it reignited that kind of conversations, and those activists, was coming out from all parts of the woodwork. And yeah, I was also co-chairing. So at the time, at the University of Hertfordshire, I was also co-chairing the staff network for Black and minoritized staff. And yeah, so one of the teaching partnership meetings, it was mentioned that there was some funding available to develop a course, and I didn't hesitate. And I don't know, it wasn't something maybe I have thought about it, but maybe subconsciously. But I just didn't hesitate in putting my hand up. We both looked at each other, myself and Joe. And
so the two of you didn't really know each other.
Oh no, we didn't. We
Yeah.
met. We had so we would come to attend the meeting. So obviously it was all online. So I think they were like monthly meetings, weren't they, Joe? And we was all kind of just speaking about our different institutions and our inputs to to the teaching partnership agenda and everything else. So we didn't actually know each other, although I had participated in PSDP.
Oh, sure.
So but at that time, I don't think I instantly recognized Joe, and that came a little bit afterwards. So I was one of the first in PSDP where Joe was the lead there. So yeah, and obviously she was a facilitator, I was a student, so it was a completely different relationship back then anyway. So yeah, the funding was available. We both put our hands up, thinking, how on earth we're going to find time to do this? But it was as though we both, I don't know, we were just like kindred spirits. It was so natural, organic. I'm going to use that word again. Sorry, so we're talking about that just before we came on there. But it was really natural how we kind of came together. And I think, as Joe mentioned, we spent a lot of time initially just really getting to know each other. Yeah. When you talk about race and racism, it's really personal. We have to be vulnerable. We have to allow ourselves, put ourselves out there. And I think in order to do that in a safe way and a way that is authentic, it was important we got to know each other as, a white woman and a Black woman coming together to facilitate.
Okay, let me pause you there.
I'm going to stop.
Because I know I want to get the whole story. So, so first of all, can I just say that any of the references that we mention will be in the show notes. So, for instance, Joe talked about Ibrahim's book. We'll put the full reference in the show notes. PSDP, for those people who don't know what that stands for, Practice Supervisors Development Program, which was a program that we've all been involved in. And again, references for that will go in the show notes. So to reflect on what you guys have shared with us so far, you were both keen to get involved in putting this thing together, but there was also there were personal issues that helped to drive that. Where was your starting point? Take us through that. I'm going to alternate, give it each of you a turn. So Joe, you can start now, and then
Me.
Shantel,
Right, where
can...
did we start? So we started, so we put in a date just before Christmas because we were so keen. So say the conversation happened end of November. We looked at our diary. None of us had actually any space in the diary, but we made room, you know. So we kind of blocked out some time in our diary, and I think initially we just said, right, how are we going to do this, you know? And I think it was about telling our stories, and understanding why, what made us want to actually put this together. So that's how it started, really, kind of just talking about our own personal journeys, our stories. You know, Jo spoke about her family and her, motivation for wanting to, put together a program like this. And then I was talking about, again, my own personal interest, my professional interest, as well as obviously now working with students. Said I was in Hertfordshire now, and that was, quite early on in my academic career, working with students and newly qualified and what have you, and just seeing their journey mirror exactly what I had seen, felt, understood when I was in practice. And, again, George Floyd and that anger, that frustration. And then now I've got an opportunity to do something. So we had a really good conversations about that. And I was really keen because I knew how I wanted the course to be. So when I say that, I
right,
mean...
but you pause there for a moment,
Okay.
maybe. So you knew how you wanted the course to be. Joe, did you come with any sort of ideas about or visions of what you wanted to see? Or was it a completely blank canvas? How did you come into... Because it's quite often, I think it's challenging, isn't it? To think about what is it that you actually want to bring to the table, or what is it that you want to end up with. So Joe, tell us what your thinking was prior to getting into this partnership.
Well, that's a great question, Sylv, and I don't think I was maybe so conscious of this at the time. But I think for me as a white woman, it required some emotional positioning in thinking, okay, what's my position here? I know what my passion is. I know what I'm interested in, and I know what might not be the right way to go about this partnership. We know there's a sort of an age-old adage about white people relying on black people to educate them how to not be racist, and I didn't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew I would be reliant on Shantel for a lot of that. And so I thought, well, what can I bring? What can I bring to it? And I think that's a general attitude I have, like, what can I do? What can I offer? And I suppose one of those is a real interest in understanding, but also helping a sort of driver to help other people understand what it means to be racist and where we might need to start with that. And yeah, I guess just an interest really in thinking, well, throwing it open and hearing what Shantel had to say. But coming with my own, having done some of my own work as well, and I was doing quite a lot of reading around that time.
That's what I was going to lead on to, yes. Because you mentioned the book earlier, and sometimes for folk, and I think it's going to be helpful. Where does one start? And is it because of what you've read, or because of what you've experienced, or both, or
Akala as well, wasn't it? Do you remember I was telling Joe about Akala, because he had come to the university to do Black History Month in that October. And he wrote a book called Natives, between talking about race and class, which is something we often don't speak about. So Carla's a rapper, and again we can put that in the show notes. And
yes, I will.
Now, the hip hop, was it the hip hop Shakespeare theatre club company he started up, and does a lot of work around universities, and a lot of written materials, and he talks about it so authentically, and again his own position, his thinking. He's only, when I say young, he's probably kind of coming up to his 40s, but really passionate about getting people to understand what it actually means. So that was a lot of work, and I remember introducing Joe to Akala as well, and getting her to read some of his work. But also what I think was important was Jo also brought the expertise around course development. And I think she hasn't mentioned that yet. She can go into that about how we actually structure it. Because as I said, I was really keen about what I would want to go into, into a course, and, the kind of material that I felt was important. But in terms of how that actually comes about, how do we frame it? How do we split up the different sections? What, kind of methods we use, with participants, all of that was brand new to me, so I didn't have, that expertise around that. And I can definitely say, Jo, was instrumental in that side. Really, we hold that those reflective spaces, and okay, we can go into that a bit more, but that's key, to how we facilitate, because it's not a training. I don't like to call it a training, or we're not teaching people. What we're doing is helping people to reflect and think and feel, and really sit down, in that discomfort, in order to then push through and learn. So yeah, that's kind of the essence.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting point, isn't it? The whole thing around, are we teaching, are we training, or let's be really ambitious and talk in terms of we're seeking to help to transform people.
Hearts and minds.
Yeah, that might be
that's what we say. No.
I mean, it might sound a bit woo-woo.
We have to think big, Sil. We have to think big, honestly.
So Jo, do you have any sort of additional comments to make on the sort of the process? Because Shantel's talking about, yes, she had a sense of what she wanted the content to be, but then the shaping and the sort of the structure and so on, you were also bringing that to the table as well. What comments do you have to make about that?
I mean, I think for me, my personal journey of 2020 was really looking in the mirror as a white person and thinking about myself as a racist person, which I think, and another one of the books that we refer to for your show notes is White Fragility by DiAngelo. And I'd read that book as well and started to grapple with the idea of myself as a racist person in a social construct that we're all affected by. And so I had done a lot of looking in the mirror, and I think for me, well, that probably helped relationally with meeting Shantel where she was at that point in 2020, and we were able to share some of our vulnerabilities about that. But I also think it was the core in my mind of where people that come on the course needed to start as well, and that they would all arrive in different places, and the complexity of that then, where you've got people that are sort of in a different stage of their journey of understanding racism. I don't experience racism when I leave my house. I'd started to realize that, my experiences of the world have an absence of racism in them, and I can easily not be aware of that. I don't have to think about racism on a daily basis. And of course, talking about this with Shantel and developing this course made me start to have to do that, and I started to get a little tiny bit of an insight into how exhausting that is actually. But this is all material, and this is the journey that we're wanting to lead people on. And it started to, I think, show up some of that, the sort of emotional complexity and vulnerability of what we're about to embark on. And we needed to do that bit of the journey ourselves. I
was just thinking, anyone seeking to embark on this sort of work, there's that level of introspection, but there's also that level of kind of exchange between the partners in terms of
it's trust. It's based on trust, don't you think? And I think that was really important. I'd never engage on such a deep level, talking about something so personal with anybody ever before. It's very intimate, let's be honest. It was very, very deep, very emotional, and we were exhausted at the end, and we made sure that if we had a long session, could we block out 3-4 hours sometimes to really get into the crux of particular issues and what have you. And that was key. It was really, really important that we did that, because it then, a lot of the feedback we get talks about our relationship, talks about the dance we do, when we're facilitating, and that would never have been possible know, had we not have put in that work. I trust Joe. Joe trusts me, and you know, we can just look at each other on screen, or she can just look at me and know, you know, if I'm upset. Because let's be honest, the course, you know, the content still evokes emotion in me. You know, I'm still going to be triggered. I'm human. I'm living with this experience. It's not lived. I'm not dead. I'm still alive. So it's current. It's present, and it would always, you know, be there. So when people are telling stories and people are talking about, you know, particular issues, it resonates. You know, I'm getting better at dealing with that. But I think that initial work we put in, that, you know, that trust, you know, that we built up, you know, really translate into, you know, really, I'm gonna say excellent facilitation, because I'm just gonna say that because it's true.
Can I
That's
say
what the
another...
feedback shows.
But you see, again, I think this is so important because I remember, for instance, as someone who was facilitating on the PSDP, one of the things that my colleagues had us doing when you're about to enter a partnership is a sort of a pre-training kind of discussion, so that you try to establish some degree of trust and synergy between you as trainers. And I think delivering this kind of training, it's so important, because so many things can happen along the way that can be triggering. And so Joe, I don't know if you have any comments to make about that, but I think that's so significant. And I think people who are listening to this will get tremendous value from hearing something about that complex.
And I mean, I've got a lot to say on it, Sylv. I think the thing that also comes to my mind, because I think the thing we're talking about is definitely a primary thing. Like the content is secondary in a way.
Right.
And we were in a time where there's a big push and a sharp focus academically on decolonizing the curriculum. And I remember thinking, gosh, I don't know whether I know what that really means. And you know, we've got to be seen as academics to be getting the right material on this program. And actually it became secondary. And really our materials, in some sense, they're pretty punchy, but they're quite basic, because actually it's all about the relationship. And it's about, I think that this is my philosophy, or our philosophy, that we're sort of holding with, is that if we want to dismantle racism, we can do it relationally. So that's where the focus needs to be. The facts and figures, they're important, and it's important to pick out the really key things. But those materials in some ways were secondary to the relational element. And I think that participants that have come along on the programme, by the end of it, would hopefully say the same thing, because it's been a relational journey for them. It's not just been about learning statistics and knowing who to quote, really, although we do quote people. But you know, the literature we're quoting, it isn't necessarily all research based. It's from wise people that have spoken on this issue for years, like Maya Angelou.
We've got Dr. Martin Luther King. We've got some quotes from him. Desmond Tutu. You know, we've got to do a lot of quotes. These freedom fighters have been, you know, that we stand. Well, I know I stand on the shoulders of giants. You know, there's a lot of gone before, and I think it's important that we, you know, we recognize that.
But but you see, again, that's whilst that's also extremely true, and I know certainly as a Black person, you know, in my times of strife and, you know, feeling bloody awful, I read some of these people who've gone before us, and it helps to comfort me in some way, shape, or form. This other element we're talking about, however, is about how, and it reminds me again of the PSDP and the whole notion of modeling. You two, or, you know, our partnerships model something to people. You're working together, the trust, the honesty. I mean, these things are all relational things. And in a way, if significant change is going to take place, I agree, it absolutely has to start with relationships. So
I'm just going to say, we're social workers, Sylvia. So and we talk about relationship-based practice. You know, that's the heart and soul of what we do when we're engaging with, you know, with our people living the experience, when we're engaging with our colleagues or managers or whoever, you know, whichever stakeholder it is about that, you know. So I'm not saying it was easy, but it seemed the right way to do it. You know, it has to be based on that. You can't, I think, training and you know, anti-racism education in the past apparently had been quite heavy, quite aggressive, quite difficult, and that's what I've heard from, you know, I think you told me that as well, so as well as a lot of other people around how it was delivered, and that doesn't work. You know, we can see it doesn't work.
But in a sense, you can see why that happened.
No, you're right. You're right.
You know what I mean?
That was, yeah, obviously that was right for the time. There was a reason for that at that time. No, you're right, and I'm not going to take that away. You're right. But obviously, as you know, I was saying, I kind of knew what I wanted, you know, the course to look like. We have to use our personalities. We have to use who we are, what we bring, and you know, as a Black woman, as a white woman, us coming together, showing others how, you know, you can begin, you know, this journey. The course is called Becoming. You know, becoming an anti-racist practitioner, becoming an anti-racist leader, because we emphasize that this is a journey. So you do the 4 sessions with us, but then it doesn't stop there. You know, that's just the beginning. You know, it is about, you know, that becoming, and that's why it's really important that you form those relationships. The first cohort that we did, they still have that WhatsApp group. You know, they've still, you know, got that connection and that bond. You know, because they've started this journey together. You know, people you went to university with, you're probably still in contact with, or who you did your PhD with. Those kinds of things. You know, you kind of you have that shared understanding, you know, that shared beginning of something, and you're able to then, you know, oh, what does that mean? Oh, I saw this on the news today. Can you help me you know, and that's what we see happening, because we're in the group too, so we can have a nose, you know. But yeah, it's that becoming, it's that journey.
Okay, I mean, unless Joe, you have anything to add to that, can we then? I mean, I'd like to move on to the actual course itself, what you found, what have been your observations, what have you learned? So Joe, I'm going to go to you. Did you have anything in addition to add to what Shantel has said, or, you know, are you happy to just move on to?
Well, I mean, I, in one sentence, can reiterate what she said in another way, is that becoming an anti-racist is a life's work for us all.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something you can learn to do and then tick a box. You know, that's the commitment it requires.
So a journey, not a destination.
Yeah, I saw a lovely thing last year about that, actually, a little cartoon where one person said, is it about the journey or the destination? And the other one said, it's the company.
Ooh.
Which I think sums us up nicely.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, that is a nice one. We need to get that and put that somewhere. I like that.
I'll send it.
Yes, please.
We'll put it in the show notes.
I'm going to say, put it in the show notes.
Put it in the show notes.
You wanted to know about the course itself, though, Sil.
Yeah, and I suppose obviously these are safe spaces, so clearly you're not going to break confidentialities or anything like that. But observations, any learning that we can take forward.
I mean, we concluded after much discussion that I mean, the course is 4 half days. 1 half day a month. We felt that it needed to be in digestible chunks, and there's something about the longevity of that, it being a process. It's not something you come on for the day and that's it. So it's about, that's what helps to create that relational learning. But we decided that we needed to start with the important basics, so language and some of the really sort of starting point concepts, like what is microaggression. So we didn't want to make an assumption about people's starting point, knowing that some people would be part of that space really and would know some of this, but getting the language agreed is page 1, I think, on anything
basic,
like
foundational. That's right.
And then we've got, so that's the first session. The second session, we start talking about whiteness as a concept and what we mean by that, The third session, we start talking about structural inequality and systemic racism and what that means as an idea, and what it means to therefore be in a racist institution, which of course social work is the same as any other institution, and organisations are. And that plays out into relationships in the organisation. And then the fourth session is what allyship means and what it means to be an anti-racist, and what people are going to do next. So they make personal pledges. So that's a sort of high-level overview.
Yeah.
But really the focus in those spaces is, I mean, the presentation of ideas from us is usually 10 or 15 minutes of the whole 3.5 hours.
Yeah.
Much of it is time spent together. Then, I mean, they are a conversation starter, really.
That's right.
And then people bring into it what resonated, and we go from there. We have got a clear sort of space where there's that part of the session, and then the other half is we split into 2 small groups, and they bring practice dilemmas. One or 2 people present a dilemma and get the whole group's sort of thoughts on it, using those traditional Tavistock ways of creating reflective spaces. And again, that's where people start to transfer their knowledge into practice, really, in their mind, and get multiple perspectives. And I think for people presenting, it can be very validating.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, I really like that format, because something both of you were saying earlier, you know, there could be potentially a tendency to either overly intellectualize the whole sort of situation, where you spend a lot of time receiving lots of information. But what it strikes me you guys are doing is you're really, really pursuing engagement in a real way with the topic, with the issue, with the circumstances. And I think people need to hear that. It's not just about hearing lots of facts, figures, and, you know, some of it may be blatantly bloody obvious, but it's real change will come from engagement in a very real way. So that means listening, it means sharing, and I suppose it means really integrating the knowledge that and the personal stuff that people are sharing. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Shantel.
Yeah, I was going to come in and say that. Yeah, no, I'm just gonna add, you know, that we purposely make sure the group is quite small. So we'll have a maximum of 16, 18 participants. You know, again, you know, we want that's important for us to help us manage the group, but also for people to feel safe enough to be vulnerable. And you know, particularly what we do on the first session is we get people to tell their stories around race. We get people to, you know, really unpick what race means to them. And as you can probably imagine, you know, a lot of the Black parties, and we try to kind of make it equally balanced between Black and white students, you know, participants, sorry, depending on obviously where we are, you know, geographically, as well. But yeah, we get people to tell their stories. We give them, you know, we spend, you know, a bit of time of that on the first day. And that's the bit that can get really emotional. For a lot of, you know, Black staff, Black participants, some of them haven't spoken about issues. We have, you know, particularly on actually most of the program, there's always one person who has really buried the issues, or a couple, and hasn't really had an opportunity to really talk about it, or hadn't realized how much it had affected you know, them going forward. And generally for you know, for white participants, they're like, I've never had to think about this before. Like it's a new experience. So that first hour or so on the first day can be really, you know, is really emotive, I'm going to be honest. And that's kind of the probably one of the most difficult parts of what happens. But it helps the group to gel. It helps people to begin that journey, and it then also supports the learning going forward. So there is a method to our madness in that.
But, you know, what's important about that as well is that white people inherently don't usually introduce themselves describing their whiteness. That it's usually Black people are other than. So for that, you know, that does help even the playing field out in some ways. It doesn't even it out, but it does. White people have said, gosh, I've never introduced myself thinking about my race. They don't question it. And so it's like straight away, that's that invitation to look in the mirror, really. And we do, the other thing we didn't mention, Shantel, is that there is a sort of offer of self-directed learning that we expect people to do. So about an hour's worth of materials before they come on each session. And the first one invites them to read some glossary of terms and write their own personal mission statement about what they want to get out of their learning. And then we've got things like we invite them to watch a 10-minute video of Akala talking and then some reflective questions, or listen to a podcast, read a blog. So it's all very accessible, and just get them to think about self and what, so that they're coming into the session already having done some things.
I was going to say, thinking already, you know, really trying to really engage, because as I said, it is really important that people, and we do smaller groups, so we have like 3 and 4s, and then we have, you know, 5s and 6. We try to make it smaller then bigger, and then we come back together to have a whole group discussion at the end as well. So that interaction, that engagement, as you said, Sylvia, is key to what we were trying to do, because there is that chance that things can just be facts, figures thrown at people and then they go away and that box is ticked. And that was something I was definitely fighting against, you know.
And I think, you know, if we're giving messages to our sector and, you know, others who may be interested, and I suppose what makes, I guess, us different from perhaps other groups who may be trying to deliver this or trying to deliver change, is that we very much are about the emotional levels. I'm not explaining this very well, but there is, isn't there? There is a significant difference with this approach, because you could have a situation where if let's say, for instance, you're a policy actor or a policy person, you might think this is all about policies, for instance. That's what I'm trying to convey. You may think this is all about policies. It may be all about making sure the numbers are right and so on. But there is this other part of the project, which is about, you know, how people engage with it. Okay, so it was so interesting. Yesterday, we were talking to another colleague, and I were talking to someone who was talking about the reaction, for instance, to George Floyd's murder, the reactions of organizations, local authorities, for instance, who may have just kicked into, well, we need to do this, we need to do that, we need to do the other. And you know, how that might have been experienced by those who are, let's say, frontline workers or whatever, who may feel that that was all very performative, and it didn't seem and didn't feel as though that was going to be sustainable over a longer period of time. And to some extent, it may have felt a little inauthentic. You know, and so I think there's a difference with this approach. Absolutely.
This is important for us.
Seems to get to the nubs of it, really.
Yeah, it's personal. Sorry, go on, Joe.
It is personal. It's personal. It's private. It's intimate. It's not risk-free. That's for sure.
100%.
You know, we're inviting people to be courageous, and we're inviting them to be clumsy and get it wrong, and all of that kind of messy, murky space that you get into when you're talking about sensitive subjects and talking about self. And I think, you know, one of the kind of discourses we have to hold all the time is that sort of swinging pendulum between certainty and, you know, how do we be anti-racist? What does that look like? And knowing what a world without racism in is. We don't know that.
No.
And so policymakers quite often are putting rules and boundaries down and implementing strategies where, you know, based on what? Because we don't know. We know some of the elements of what we think it might look like. But, you know, often what we can create in our space is a big overwhelm of, oh, no, it's massive and it's uncontained. And, you know, what do we do about this? And we have to always then bring them back to thinking about their own agency. And that's a, you know, that is the line that we walk all the time, isn't it, Shantel?
It is. No, it
and
is.
sometimes I can get into that place, and so, you know, we have to check ourselves out, like how are we doing on the feeling overwhelmed and out of our depth and depressed about it.
And it's important the check-ins in between as well, because obviously we have space times when, you know, the participants are on the, you know, Zoom 15-20 minutes, and that gives myself and Joe you know, a time to kind of check in. How we doing, how's it pitched, you know, how you feeling, you know. And usually it's Joe looking at me, you know, how are you, you know. I'm like, no, I'm okay, I'm good, you know, just to make sure emotionally, because I think the first cohort that we had, obviously it's the first time we were delivering it. It was all new, and yeah, I got really emotional, and I can say that because I just need to be authentic about that. And I did start to question, you know, is it right for me to put myself in this situation? Why am I doing this? You know, you kind of have all those kind of questions. When you get to the end, you know, when we got to the end, actually, was it the second one? We have a little break in between. So between the second and the third, there's kind of like a month or 2 months gap. We try to leave a gap. And I had to reflect a lot about what on earth was I doing? Why am I doing this? But yeah, when we get to the end and we see, you know, particular participants that at the beginning were literally crossed arms. Why am I here? I don't want to be here, even though they volunteered to come on. And you see the full circle. Oh my God, it just validates, you know. It was like, oh my goodness, this is why we do this. Yes, it's tough. And as Joe said, it's not risk-free. But I always talk about the lactic acid, you know, we have to push through that last lactic burn. And, you know, big up Usain Bolt, because I always use him as an example. He might be listening. You don't know if he's listening. He might be, honestly. But you know, when he's running, you know, when he's getting all these golds and he's pushing through, you know, to get the 100, you know, to get to do the 100 meters. When he talks about the lactic acid buildup, you know, in his muscles, you know, and if he was to stop at that point, then he wouldn't go on to win the gold. So I always talk about people when they feel uncomfortable, when they're feeling like they don't want to go on, you know, this is too difficult. Just think of that lactic acid and think when you push through, when you get through that burn, when you get through that discomfort, when you're courageous, when you're brave, you know, this is what happens, you can achieve, you know. So that's how you know, that's the analogy I used to encourage people, you know, you push through that. And I think that can go in so many different situations as well. But that's what I keep in mind when I'm feeling like I don't want to do this anymore. And that's what I share with the participants.
And that's why I like working with her.
It's through.
Look,
you run the other way. Yeah.
But it's yeah. There's that because obviously she's a strong woman and resilient, you know, and I think that probably that is required of both of us in our different ways. But it's that creative way of teaching and learning that makes a very sensitive and quite challenging topic light. And we can do that. We can again, we sort of move between emotional positions of sincerity, but can also have a laugh as well when we're working together, and we don't feel we have to just be like newsreaders on Zoom.
I can't do that anyway. Sorry, it doesn't. I can't be that, and that's what I said. Joe knows that. I can't. I can only be me. You know, I can only be authentic to who I am, and that's what I've realized when I'm genuinely myself, and that's where that comes from. Showing my emotions, you know, I'm not going to hold back. This is an important topic. This is personal to me. So if I feel like I need to be emotional, I did beat myself up the first time, you know, and I had to work through that. But I think it just shows the authenticity, you know, and again, you know, it's important that I'm able to and feel comfortable enough to do that.
Well, thanks, ladies. One of the things I guess I need to also check out with you is you know, what's it like doing this online, because you're delivering this online, and you know, for people who may be listening who are educators, there's such different feelings, isn't there, about being in the space with people, but it also sounds extremely potent even though you're not in the space with people.
Do you want to kick off, Joe?
Any reflections on that?
Yeah. Well, again, I've got a lot to say on that. I'm thinking about that a lot.
Yeah. Go on.
We had to do it online because we were in
a
national lockdown, so we weren't going to do it in person. We thought that was the only way to do it, but we had to make a pragmatic decision. I think that there's pros and cons really to online
right.
learning. It was hard doing it online, I have to say, because you've
Mhm.
got no ability to tune in with the room on some. You've got some ability, but it's very, very limited. And so you're really relying on what you can see in front of you in this little box. I've learned though from colleagues of colour this year saying there's something about being at home that feels safer than going out into the world and facing microaggression.
Yes.
I'm going to make myself vulnerable talking about my relationship to racism, I'd rather do it in my own
In
house.
my comfort of my home.
So
That's right.
being online is a really helpful one.
Yeah.
To some people, they can turn their camera off. There's a, you know, whereas if you're in a room, would you just walk out?
Yeah, so just in addition to, you know, what Joe was saying about online, you know, as she said, we had no choice. we was in the middle of a national pandemic, global pandemic, sorry, and we felt we couldn't wait, like put it off any longer. It was you know, either do or die. So we did do the first two, but we did manage to have two in person as well. You know, the end ones. Remember I said there was a gap in between, so you know, during that time we were relieved. And yeah, I agree that, you know, a lot of people felt safer, you know, to do that. But I think as facilitators, well, particularly for me, I can't speak for Joe, but I think it heightened my ability to be able to deliver as well. I think it made me think more. Well, I don't know what I'd have done if I was in person, but you know, you're really, because of the material so emotive, because you know the subject is really, really important. I think I had to work harder. I think you do have to work harder on Zoom to translate, you know, our relationship, as I said, as we work together, but also holding that space and allowing people to be vulnerable and, you know, responding to their questions and, you know, as I said, helping them push through the lactic acid burn and all of those things, you know, is much more difficult online than it would be in person. You can't touch somebody, you can't read them, you can't all those other social cues that we pick up on, you know, as humans, you know, were not available to us being online. So I think it enhanced, you know, my performance in where I deliver, but also how to then engage when we then returned, you know, to normality as well. So yeah.
Okay, well, listen, you know, we've just scratched the surface. But I think it's been great to share some of what's behind this great program, and I hope those who are listening get a sense of what it is you're trying to achieve. But as we move towards wrapping up, is there anything else that you want to add that would take us a little step closer to what you're trying to achieve with the program? Joe, you can start. And then Shantel.
Gosh, what would I want to add? That's such a big question. I mean, I just would say be your authentic self. Find your people that you can be your true self with.
Yeah.
So important. And if you reach a point of thinking that you've achieved everything, you need to
think again.
You need to think again.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
And one of the
right, go on.
I just think you know, it's about, well, like as Maya Angelou says, when you know better, do better. So, you know, expect to get it wrong, model getting it wrong, model the uncomfortableness of that and what you can learn from it. But and just do a small thing. Like as Desmond Tutu says, it's the small things that are important. Try not to worry too much about the whole. But look at the whole occasionally.
Yeah.
To remind yourself of why you're doing it.
Yes.
Perfect. And my call would be, you know, particularly to white people, you know, in terms of fragility, and that's Robin DiAngelo's book where she talks about, you know, white fragility. And I would definitely, again, press on people to read that. And it's, you know, about, you know, not being fragile, basically, you know, how you're able to then, you know, engage with the conversation. So yeah, surrounding yourself with people who can help you to learn and grow, but also doing that work yourself, you know, reading, you know, the books and engaging with podcasts and everything else, but also thinking about what does it truly mean to be anti-racist. It isn't something you can just say you are. You have to, you know, demonstrate. It's a verb. We always say that it's an, you know, it's an active thing you have to take part in. And, you know, when you understand why it's important, and we can all do something, you know, a small thing from where we are, I think that is kind of key. You know, don't be worried, don't be afraid. This is a safe space for you to be vulnerable, for you to, you know, really ask the questions and, you know, have the dialogue around things that you know, what most people want to ask or want, or, you know, have some sort of, you know, awareness of, sometimes not all the time, but maybe have not had the space. And that's generally you know, the feedback we get, that, oh my goodness, I always wanted to ask that, or I always wanted to, but had no space or time to actually do. So yeah, it's important that we remember why, what's the reasons, you know, go back to the history. And I think that's important, for people to understand how we got here. You know, how we got here, how was whiteness constructed, why was whiteness constructed, and go back to that to really understand how we got here, because you can't, you know, they always say, you know, you can never know where you're going until you know where you've come from. And I think that's really, really important as well. But yeah, there's so much more material we could offer. There's so much more, you know, things we could throw at people. But I think, you know, simplicity is the key with this one in terms of that, and, you know, developing those skills of reflection and really engaging with the conversation.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for sharing you know, your thoughts, details about your program, and hopefully, you know, people who, having heard this, will get more insight into what you're trying to do. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for having us, Sylv.
Thank you very much, and we look forward to coming back soon to talk about something else. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.